feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie podcast. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, how are you feeling today? Are you feeling joy? Are you feeling anger, disgust, fear?
Is tired an emotion or just like a feeling? Exhausted? Yeah. No, I'm tired. As you guys can see, you can't see us. No video for the foreseeable future. We started this with the last review. I'm in the middle of packing up my condo. I think I've moved 47 times since we've started podcasting together. So just a lot going on, but other than that, man, I'm good. It's go 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 go. So fitting in screenings and reviews on top of moving and finishing school, and I'm going to San Francisco in a week, and I'm very lucky. All of these things, I'm very grateful for all of it. It's just nonstop. I just got in from seeing a different movie this morning with you, Bike Riders, which we will review soon. That should be up next week for everyone. But I knew if I sat down and texted you, like, give me half an hour, I'm like, I don't know if this would ever happen.
You'd pass out. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
how
I
are
think it's
you
fair.
feeling?
Well, just to go back to it, like, you mentioned all those things that you have going on. It's one thing to have them happening, throughout a month or a couple of months or, half a year. But it feels like for you, like it's happening all at once. Like it's like
No,
you're going
and it's
from
just
one
been
thing to the
nonstop,
other.
right? I think since last year, when perfect movie to talk about. I mean, I took a mental health break due to anxiety and stuff like that for a good chunk of last year, right? And then I just feel like since then, I'm much better now, and I still have anxiety, which we'll talk about when we review this movie, but going back to school helped with that and all this kind of stuff. But then that added all that work on top of it. And then, just having a life with my wife and everything. I feel like I haven't seen Bad Boys yet. I haven't seen Furiosa yet. So like it's
The
trying to fit everything in. I know. So still a lot to see. But when a new Pixar movie comes out, it is something that I want to see right away. One of my favorite studios. We'll talk a lot about, like we do, not just the film, but about the trajectory of the studio and what they've been making. But here today, we are going to focus on Inside Out 2. But Eric, back to you. How are you feeling on this topic of emotions?
I'm good. It's one of those things where, everybody has their own set of stresses and anxiety, and, you kind of feel like you're just going from one thing to the next. So, with me, like right now, this is the time of year where we're getting into the summer movie season. It's not as hectic as it has been in past years. And that might just simply be because of the delays with the strikes and things like that, and this movie the summer movie season seems to be a little bit more
muted or
or just sparse in comparison to past years, and so like right now, you've been very candid and transparent in talking about your health. I'm going to be doing a sleep study coming up, so I don't have any anxiety when it comes to that. I'm actually very happy that I'm doing it. It's more so just like, okay, like what happens afterwards, and like what are the results and what are the next steps, more so than actually doing them. So it's one of those things where it's like, health is important, and you've talked about that with taking a break and also trying to reinvent yourself and figuring things out. And so those aspects all play a part into who we are as people. And like this film, I think nobody is one thing, and emotions are complicated and mixed. And we'll be talking about not only Inside Out in that frame of reference, both the sequel and the original movie, but I think Pixar as a whole, I think, is worth always having a conversation about in terms of where they are right now.
Mm-hmm. I mean, let's get right into it. So, Pixar, another sequel, Inside Out 2. It's been 9 years since the original, which really hit me a little bit. I had the first Inside Out feels like yesterday to me. Like it really doesn't feel like it was that long ago because I
So
remember going to see
yesterday.
it with my entire family. A wholly original movie, I think. Fantastically imagined, vision into a child's mind, but just uh, emotions and you're in your own head. I feel like such a wonderful movie, an original movie. um Now 9 years later, getting into the sequel, I'm gonna kick it over to you. What did you think?
Okay, so here is kind of like just the general consensus for me.
Yeah.
Another mid-tier Pixar sequel struggles to find its sense of self, coasting purely on cleverness. There are moments of joy, but it feels like a step down compared to the first film and Turning Red. And when you're watching this movie, you're thinking to yourself, okay, this makes the most sense in terms of having a sequel. We want to see what
Hmm.
Riley Anderson is up to in terms of, making that, leap into adolescence and becoming a teenager and what that brings with it and how relatable and empathetic those aspects can be, because that's when you start to feel anxiety and embarrassment, even more, and ennui, and envy, and those things complicate situations. And the premise of it works, but then we start to repeat what we saw in the first movie. And the biggest problem, I think, with the film, in my opinion, is that anxiety and joy are basically on separate sides of Riley's mind throughout the majority of this narrative. And what made Inside Out, the first film, so special, it was a conversation between joy and sadness and embracing the two, and not trying to not only repress those feelings, but understanding that sadness is just as important as joy, and
Yeah.
not to be afraid of it. And with this, you don't have that dialogue back and forth between joy and anxiety. They're separated throughout, and I think that hurts the film quite a bit.
Yeah. Overall, I think I enjoyed the movie. And I think on paper, and even as I was beginning to watch the movie, this has all the ingredients for something that I should have loved. Um, I really love the first film, as I just mentioned, and stumbled over my words at the beginning, but a really incredible kind of look into your mind that only Pixar can do. That thing that appeals to both children and adults, that has all the innovative kind of visual language you would want from a Pixar movie, that is just pure imagination and pure brilliance. Looking at this, of going, okay, this does make sense as a franchise in my head, of going, okay, you have the view into a kid's mind, then you have a view into a teen's mind, and then you could see this continuing into, going into college as an adult, and something that they could revisit over and over again. So then transitioning from a view into a kid's mind into a teen's mind, you have Riley, who is a hockey player, who is suffering from anxiety, and going into a new a camp, and wanting to be liked by everyone. And these are all things I experienced as a teenager. I played hockey. I was kind of shy and anxious at a lot of places, even though I held that in. And the movie does a really clever job at showcasing those different elements that you might experience in your mind, much like the first movie does. But as I was watching it, yes, it has some laughs. Yes, it's clever. But they just felt like something was missing at the end. I don't think it's a bad movie. I enjoyed my time with it for the most part. Um, but as I said, I think this could be a franchise. But as I see the second one, it just felt like more of the same. It doesn't, yes, you're touching on a few different new emotions, but what you're doing with those new emotions is kind of exactly what you did in that first film. And I just, you can't just ride off the cleverness. It felt like a series of clever visual representations of different elements of your mind or different emotions you might experience in your mind, that were strung together with kind of a loose plot of a kid going to a summer camp for hockey. And it just like, I don't know, there was a disconnect there between Riley's story and what was going on in her head that I felt wasn't super well balanced, and it just never clicked with me. And I sound super negative, but again, I think it's just because I have such high expectations for Pixar, and I really do love the first Inside Out, to where I'm sitting at a mixed neutral, maybe mixed positive, but that feels super disappointing to me, to the point where I don't think I really want to revisit this. It feels like something that was an enjoyable watch, but a passive watch, and from a studio that I said I really really do love, and I want that emotional gut punch that a Pixar film usually gives you. But ironically, there was little emotion found in me while watching the movie, which was surprising to me. I do like elements. I think Pouchy is great, a new character. I think there are some laugh out loud moments. I like the cast. Like, I think Maya Hawke and Io Edebiri do a great job as Anxiety and Envy. There's some other additions to the cast too that are good. Everyone is good. But it just sort of felt like going through the motions to me. Like, it just,
or the
I,
emotions.
ex- I'm no pun intended, but pun intended.
But there's
So,
a lot of puns in
um,
this too, right? Like,
yeah,
you're talking about the visual representations of abstract ideas. The other
yeah,
thing that Pixar is very, very playful with is kind of the punny humor.
yeah,
And that feels like, okay, you can use that to a degree and have that for, partly for the grown-ups because they can get a kick out of, something that's visually represented, but also plays on, a word or a phrase or something like that. But we saw it done so well in the first movie, and the structure of the film shouldn't work necessarily because part of you is thinking, like, when you look at that first film, you see about 4 to 7 names on the screenwriting and additional dialogue with, people like the only returning screenwriter is Meg LaFauve, who came back and co-wrote this script with Dave Holstein, and Dave Holstein is the showrunner of Kidding, the Jim Carrey series, and Kelsey Mann, who's the director on this, has a story credit. And so you really only have the two people that are kind of working through, Riley's dilemma in this narrative. And it feels like, again, both very similar to what we already saw in terms of it being a journey movie, but
yeah,
then the additions or the caveats, the things that kind of feel a little bit more grown up, or dealing with certain things, there are aspects to that feel, okay, is this simplifying it a little too much, even in terms of it being a kids movie, because these
yeah,
emotions are so complicated, and knowing your sense of self is a very specific thing that sometimes when you're watching this movie, it almost feels like it's the shallow version of
yeah,
what something like Turning Red, which I already mentioned, Domi Shi's film, that explored the Chinese Canadian perspective on puberty and adolescence and coming of age, and felt like it was having a real conversation about these things that wasn't just a metaphor. It talked about, having your period. It talked about bodily functions. And, this has it a little bit, but it felt like there was more specificity in Turning Red. And so when you're comparing it to the first Inside Out and
yeah,
Turning Red, and even just like you mentioned, the best of Pixar and what we come to expect from a studio that, has such concise plotting and visually stunning animation and, you know, heartwarming emotions that really envelop you in the storytelling. There is that expectation of, okay, well, if this is a sequel to something you already love, it better not just be repetitive. And unfortunately, I think that's the biggest fault of the film, is that it is repetitive in a lot of ways, even though, like you said, I think there are moments in the film narratively that work. I think there's a visual representation of a panic attack that feels very spot on. You know, you mentioned Pouchy, which is, I think, the best character in this movie in terms of new additions. But even that, you know, plays on the idea of forgotten memories and, you know, characters of Riley's past. And there's a whole thing referencing, you know, Riley's vault as if it were the Disney vault and the deep, dark secrets that lie in there. But when you're watching it, you're thinking to yourself, oh man, you know, I really loved what that first movie did so brilliantly. And you're thinking even more about it, to the point where this movie almost hurts the first one a little bit, because you're thinking to yourself, where were those other emotions for the parents in the first movie?
Yeah, you know, I mean, that doesn't bother me that much, really. Like, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I definitely, like, that doesn't, I don't know. I get that you have to introduce new emotions, but I agree with you of why wouldn't they be in the, you know, in the parents' head when you go into those little throwaway bits in the first film. But that doesn't bother me all that much. But I do think I agree with you on the panic attack. I think that that is really well done. I think the joy suppressing memories kind of thing is really, really interesting. Or just suppressing memories in general, keeping things locked in a vault. Like, those are very clever. And that's what I mean. Like, they're still very good at going, how can we have a visual identity or show this in the film in a really clever way of if these are all characters living in your mind. And that's what the movie does a really good job at, even though I do agree with you that, you know, once we saw that so well done in the first one, where if it's just a different emotion and you're showing it in a slightly different way, that cleverness or the you know, innovation or whatever you want to call it is lost a little bit, and it does feel a little bit more repetitive. You mentioned gorgeous visuals, and I think sometimes um, in Pixar movies, same with Elemental recently and things like that. I think I just expect them to look amazing, so I don't usually even comment on it. But it does look great. Like, it's a very brilliantly animated film. And I think that's just something, as Pixar, you know, gets further and further, like, their movies have always looked amazing. And I think you just take that for granted now. So I rarely comment on that, but the movie does look great.
Well, going back to that as well, and also this is going to Turning Red, it does feel like Pixar is now opening up more to different animation styles, whether it be anime and Turning Red. And here we have a couple of different styles that are interjected in terms of the aesthetic, and it's playing with sort of other mediums. And I think that's something that they've opened up a little
effect.
bit. And just quickly, because you mentioned that, I think like the one thing that Pixar, you know, I think Pixar now is competing against a lot of independent animation companies and even other major studios that have been able to catch up with Pixar in terms of telling a full-fledged story with great animation, where, you know, there's obviously some really solid DreamWorks movies, like the How to Train Your Dragon films are great, but it always felt like Pixar was ahead. Nowadays it feels like they're competing more with other studios, whether they be independents or other major studios like the Spider-Verse films, which also deal with anxiety and depression and, you know, the idea of feeling like you're not worthy of something and imposter syndrome. And so, you know, these critical internalized feelings that are pivotal to Riley's core, that were maybe groundbreaking in a way that felt like it was both accessible to parents and adults, you know, nearly 10 years later, maybe it's not as revelatory because we've had, you know, nearly a decade's worth of other films that have caught on to tell these stories in ways that are similar or even more nuanced.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that, and I don't know if that's an oversaturation thing or the team spread out too thin. Like, I mean, I'm sure they just hired more people, so there's probably the same amount of people working on each one of these things, but again, story is story, and I think. Yeah, we've talked about this with the MCU, with Star Wars, and it's just because Disney is Disney, and Disney's the biggest thing and the biggest company, it seems like, and they have the biggest properties. So I think maybe we analyze them a bit more. Maybe I just do, but um, the quality dips, right? Like there was a time where every Pixar movie was hitting or every Marvel movie was hitting. And I think we're just in a spot now where, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm okay with them just being, I don't know. Am I okay? I want every Pixar movie to be like
You're on a case by case
great.
basis now. I think that's the thing where it's become, where it's like, there was a time where, before the Star Wars prequels, everything that Star Wars was, with the exception of the holiday special, was great, and fans and general moviegoers embraced it. And there's that period in the late 90s into the early 2000s where, again, for the most part, maybe with the exception of the Cars movies and A Bug's Life,
but even then, very successful. Maybe not.
Absolutely.
For us,
I'm not looking at it now from the point of view of box office success,
but critically,
critically, but you look at those films, everything was successful, whether it was critically or financially, and there was no sort of deviation there. Like, it's just like, Pixar it's an event film. It's a movie that we need to go and see theatrically, and they're going to deliver, and we know they're going to deliver. Now it does feel like, okay, well, they've broken the seal of doing more sequels, which was something they kind of wanted to avoid for the most part, because they always talked about trying to find original stories.
Yeah.
And they would only do sequels if it really sort of made sense. Now that's changed, and it does feel like there is a divide here of them trying to be more commercial, but then also, the odd time they'll introduce a new movie, but then even some of the newer films do feel watered down compared to, like, the Ratatouilles and the Wall-E's and the Ups and, the first Toy Story movie, which obviously is which was groundbreaking, just being the first fully CGI computer animated feature film. So, like you said, it's ebbs and flows. There are peaks and valleys. And I just think at this point, you can't just simply accept that Pixar is going to make one great movie after another. I think you have to look at it from the perspective of, okay, let's see this specific film. And, like we're saying this now where, like, Pixar kind of seems like on a little bit of a, not a spiral, but just seems to be on a little bit of a low point. But we both like Turning Red. We both are big fans of Soul, and so, it's not.
Yeah, I loved Lightyear more than most people, and that's there. Like that was very much the one where people are like, I think it's a bridge too far, with the spin-off of Toy Story being like I like what they did in that movie. Again, a lot of that came from that IMAX screening that we saw when they did full frame IMAX. I thought that was really cool. But no, there's still some great stuff. Don't get me wrong. I think it's just with Elemental, Luca, I didn't love, and like there's more that I'm just like kind of on than I would like. And that's fine though too. And then sometimes you got to remember that, yes, Pixar ultimately make great films for both kids and adults. And that's something we talked about in our Soul review and in our Turning Red review and things like that. And when Pixar's at its best, it is so enjoyable for kids, but then so enjoyable for adults. And I think in this, yes, you get that a little bit, but I don't even know, maybe with the 9-year gap in between these two movies coming out, that maybe they should have jumped ahead further in time with Riley. Like, I don't know if the couple year gap in between the first film and this one, what made it, different enough. I know being a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old is very different, I guess, right? Like
it's the easiest way to introduce those new emotions, right? Because you develop them in your teenage years. So so they're probably thinking, okay, well, we get that sort of montage at the beginning to catch you up on what Riley's doing. And there's an aspect of feeling like, okay, well, once you hit those years, especially early on in developing those new emotions,
and they're extreme at that time too, right? And that's why, and you talked about joy and anxiety being separated. And I don't know, it's again, this is a very different, a 13-year-old girl and a 35-year-old man, but I mean, it is universal themes, right? This is still stuff you might deal with as you're in your 30s and as a man or a woman or
they don't go away.
Whoever,
That's the whole point.
And that is the whole point. And I like those flashes into the parents' minds, even if it's retconny a little bit in this universe or whatever. But I like the idea that anxiety will suck the joy out of you, right? And if you let it consume you, you won't be able to experience joy. And I remember last year when I was at my worst that is true, right? And you know that too, Eric. So like, I don't mind that element, even though those two things ultimately, you know, like all your emotions have to all work together. And I think the movie does do a good job at that. I just, yeah, it's hard to even put my finger on it, but like, I laughed, I thought, oh, that's clever. And like, but it's just, as it went through, I'm like, okay. And I don't know if this is a me problem, but like, there was something missing. Like, it's almost like everything they showed was like, okay, yeah, that's where I expected them to go or something, right? If you were saying like, oh, a movie taking an Inside Out sequel taking place when Riley's going through puberty and experiencing anxiety and, you know, envy and things like that. Everywhere they went, I kind of went, oh yeah, that makes sense. And I don't know, that might be a me problem, right? Like it's well made. It was enjoyable. I just don't think it was great. And that's my personal opinion on it. And again, it had all the ingredients. I really thought it might be something that like, oh, this makes sense to do a sequel, but part of me would have liked this to be more like the Before movies, or Michael Apted's Up series, right? Is that what it is?
Yeah, not to be confused with the film Up from Pixar.
Yeah.
But yes, the Up movies where you keep revisiting the character at different points in their life. Yeah.
And I would love them to do that. And I still want them to do that. If they're going to have a franchise out of Inside Out, I really do think that I just think you should grow up with your audience too. And the people, I know a lot of us were older when 9 years ago, I was still in my 20s, but I mean like for the kids who saw that movie, right? Like age up with them almost. And I know
Caitlin Diaz, who was the original voice of Riley, was replaced here by Kensington Tallman. And she grew up. So like a part of it's like almost like I kind of wish, nothing against Kensington Tallman, it's almost like I wish Diaz's character was still there because it would feel and grow more up authentic.
Exactly. And that's what I mean. Like, I don't think you needed to, especially, we'll bring it back to Turning Red. We just had a movie that went through, you know, an experience of going through puberty and as a teenager and things like that. And yes, that
and cultural specificities.
Yeah. But still a universally a universal theme that anyone, I love that movie. And I was related to a ton of it. And I feel like they did so much of that movie well that like, I understand this movie feels both repetitive from Inside Out 1 and Turning Red, which we only got a couple years ago. Right. So I know we're playing, backseat writer, director, whatever like that. But like,
but it's comparing and contrasting, right? Like, I think that's fair, especially when it does repeat the beats like that, because you're thinking to yourself, oh, this is similar in terms of, Riley moved, and that change in the first film had a huge impact because it was her having to restart all over again. And what they're doing here is like, okay, you're about to go into high school, and, there's a moment here early on where her friends tell her something and she feels like, okay, well, now I'm having to restart all over again. But it's a smaller change, even though it still is significant. But in comparison to the first film, it is a slightly sort of smaller step compared to making that big leap of
Yeah.
literally moving from one place to another and having to, reinvent yourself and figure yourself out again. And, obviously, internally and biologically, you're having bigger changes in your life. But yeah, there's just something when you're watching this that you're thinking to yourself, okay, like there are funny moments. Like, I think, the Pouchy is great. I think, the aspect of restlessness and not being able to sleep because of
Yeah.
anxiety. I really like that there's no antagonist in the sense of the humans, that it's all Riley's insecurities and anxieties coming through that are doing it, because it would be easy to turn the Firehawk superstar Valentina Val Ortez into the villain that's like
Into
pressuring
some
her.
bullying.
Yeah, but she never does. And
Yeah.
like that I appreciate, because that feels like, okay, like Val, is Riley idolizes this character, but in a lot of these kind of like teen movies, the popular kid pressures the one that's trying to kind of become one of them and conform, and says, oh, well, you gotta, ditch your friends, you have to change your hair color, you have to dress a certain way. And that's never the case here. And that kind of feels refreshing in a very simple but understated manner, where it's like, okay, this is, not turning the human characters into the villain. And it makes Riley more complicated in some of the choices she does make when she does things that obviously are out of character for her, but she's going through so much anxiety and stress that you can understand why she would do certain things. And so, I do appreciate the film, even though I ultimately was disappointed by it. I just think that overall, when you're watching something like this, you have those expectations of, okay, this is a sequel to a film that I loved. And then on top of all of that, this is from a company in a studio that usually makes great films, and they, have a certain quota when it comes to, if we do a sequel, we have to find the right story to tell.
And while it mostly works, I don't know if this was it. So yeah, I sound more negative, but I'm going to give the film a 3 out of 5. I do still think it's enjoyable. Again, I hate being that guy being like, you could watch it on Disney Plus or something. I do, but I want you to support Pixar movies in theaters too, because I don't want these to be Disney Plus things. So I really, it's a gorgeous looking movie. We saw it in laser AVX here in Canada, and I mean, thank God they replaced those projectors with laser projectors. We've seen 2 movies in that theater the last this week, and they both looked good. Um, I still think it's worth a watch. I think if your kids, or you, I guess your kids, they'd be way older now. I mean, I guess watch the first one on Disney Plus and then go see this with them. And I hope it's a hit, just because I want Pixar movies in theaters. I don't want them to be relegated to Disney Plus, but I do think that this is mid to lower tier Pixar personally, but that's still enjoyable to me. I'll still take that. I feel the same kind of how I felt of Luca, where I'm like, it's not a bad movie. I want these to fucking hit, and it just didn't. And I'm like, okay, so it's okay. So it's a 3 out of 5
It's
for me.
very episodic. Like, it feels like it would be more of like an episode for a TV show version of Inside Out than anything else. Quickly, I just also wanted to mention, going back to the casting, this is also where I feel like there's maybe a lack of inspiration here. And I'm not saying that anybody in the movie is bad, because I think everybody's fine. Like, nobody doesn't feel like it doesn't work, but it does feel like, Maya Hawke, Io Edebiri, Paul Walter Hauser as Embarrassment are almost algorithmic in terms of like they're popular right now and things. And so Pixar has always found interesting casting choices that feel outside of the box. And the only person in this particular film that kind of feels like, oh, this is like weirdly um you know edgy for them, or doing something that's outside of it, is casting Adèle Exarchopoulos as Ennui, which is like the one thing that kind of is both clever and inspired as a choice. And not to say that anybody is, again, is bad in the movie or doesn't work. Even, replacing Fear and Disgust, who were originally voiced by Bill Hader and Mindy Kaling, with Tony Hale and Liza Lapira. They're fine. Like, they're not bad. They don't sound the same, obviously, but it doesn't distract you from what you're watching. It's just, it more feels like, again, going back to that like sequel thing where, sometimes you would watch an Aladdin sequel or Lion King sequel that was direct to video.
Robin Williams isn't the genie anymore.
Yeah,
right?
and that's the kind of where you're talking about like the off nature of certain things, where it's slightly almost like a downgrade there, but it's not bad. It just feels like, okay, well, we know these characters from this film is this way, and obviously, like Amy Poehler is still wonderful, and Phyllis Smith, I think, is like amazing casting.
Yeah, she's great.
As Sadness, but yeah, there's a part of it that feels like, okay, like they're always picking people that you wouldn't expect to use, like the way that they use Patton Oswalt in Ratatouille was fantastic. And here, like, the only casting choice is Exarchopoulos, where I felt like, oh, this is like, them reaching from, the international cinema scene of things and pulling this person into the world,
this big Pixar movie. Yeah, no,
I
agree.
Spielberg does sometimes with his films, and finds people that are interesting and outside the norm. Like, I'm glad Chris Pratt's not in this, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do know what you mean. I will push back a little bit. And I think both Maya Hawke and I know you're not saying that they're bad.
No, they're good. They're good. It's just,
I think they're both well cast. I think it totally makes sense that they cast each of them. But I do understand what you're saying as well. So I think they both do a great job. I think they're both very well cast in each role. And I think they both do a really great job. So I understand, on Pixar's side of thing of using them, and I think that they do a great job, but I do understand what you're saying as well. So going back to it, sorry, lost my train of thought. Yeah, 3 out of 5 for me. What's your rating, Eric?
I'm gonna go 2.5 out of 5.
2.5 out of 5. So that's got to be low on your Pixar ranking then.
Yeah, but there's still a bunch. I mean, Elemental is a 2.
Elemental, Good Dinosaur, I'm guessing, is down there. Brave, right?
The car movies.
The Cars movies, which I do always forget about. But shout out to the Cars ride at Disneyland. That ride rules. As much as I don't love the Cars franchise, I'm kind of indifferent. I think they're just not, for us. But like
Monsters University, I think is down there.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, there's another one where a prequel, but another entry in a franchise. I feel like it is the Pixar sequels that I go, okay, they're enjoyable, but some of that magic is, I hate it sounds corny, but some of the magic is gone when it's just another entry in a franchise, right? There are clever ideas in all of them, even Monsters University and things like that.
Well, Incredibles 2, which is also another natural,
another one
sequel
enjoyable.
That would make sense, right? But it doesn't compare to the first one. And I think because they took more time in between the two films, which also in the movie world of those films doesn't have that much time in between, it does feel like it loses something a little bit, where I think the Toy Story films 2 and 3 specifically, less so 4, feel like they're the only ones that kind of work in terms of the narrative structure and kind of keeping, because the Toy Story 1 and 2 weren't that far apart from each other, and Toy Story 3, which I still think is my favorite Pixar movie, really kind of pushed the boundaries in terms of like an existential crisis for action figures. And I think like that was really interesting for that period. But you look back at them now and you're like, oh man, like that, like Toy Story 3 was what, 2010, 2011? And you're just thinking to yourself,
2010, yeah.
Oh my God, like time really does fly.
Well, we always talk about it. They were on such like a roll, right? When you had Toy Story 2, Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Cars, okay, super successful, not for us. Ratatouille, WALL-E, Up, Toy Story 3. And then you get Cars 2, Brave, Monsters University. Then you get Inside Out. And then you get Good Dinosaur. And then you get Finding Dory, another sequel that I just could not... I just, it doesn't work for me. And then
the
Cars
stuff with
3.
Newt as well, that
But
being
then,
canned. And
yes, but Coco is great. Encanto is no, not Encanto.
are you pulling a Maya
Soul
Hawke
is
like
great.
Shrek?
Yeah, no, God, that was funny. Bless her heart. That's I wonder if she's just playing into the anxiety thing and
Well,
doing
it
it. But
also makes you
I guess
realize that like we're so fixated on film from both, you know, an artistic standpoint but an industry standpoint, that even the people that in the industry that are working in it don't
they
necessarily,
don't. Yeah,
you know, they're not nerds in that way, you know. And so
yeah,
like
they
it's
just like
refreshing to know
things, right?
that, yeah, or it's a job, and there's nothing wrong with that either. And so, you know, like say, you don't have to be up on every single stat or statistic or know
Up,
everything. Yeah,
Up
Up
is
is
so good,
amazing.
man.
Up is
Up
really
is
special.
amazing. Wally is amazing. Ratatouille is great. God, yeah.
They had so
So
much great stuff that I think like you always will go in, like even with this and the last couple of movies that you mentioned, I'm still always looking forward to it. And I think being disappointed or sad in this case that it didn't work for me on the way that the first one did, you're still going to give Pixar the benefit of the doubt for the next film, because you know that when it works,
oh, it's
they
amazing.
fire on
Yeah.
all cylinders.
That's
And
what I
so
mean. So you
that's
can
what you
kind of,
want.
you give them a pass almost of being like, okay, this one didn't work for me, but that's
Yeah.
okay. Not that you
They're
get,
more
I get,
consistent than M. Night Shyamalan, I'll tell you
yeah,
that
and
much.
we still cheer for that guy. So
Yeah.
I mean, I do. I every
And
movie,
same.
I hope it works, and sometimes it does. Most times it
Most times
doesn't.
it doesn't.
So, yeah, it's just like I think once we hit Onward, it was the pandemic, right? Like Onward, and maybe that's it too. It's I think with the pandemic, the strikes, things like that, and I know we're getting a little bit off topic, but trying to keep it on topic with Pixar, of like I think we're seeing it in a lot of places that it's taken a while to get back into the kind of swing of things. I think COVID really hit everyone hard, and then these strikes really hit everyone hard when it comes to production. And now we might have, I know IATSE might not necessarily affect animation, but it will affect live action if an IATSE strike happens. But even with the IATSE strike maybe happening, I've heard a lot of places are slow to even get productions up and running because they don't want them stopping halfway through or a third of the way through, right? So um I think just all that kind of stuff really put a hard stop on things and then a hard stop on things again, that I feel like quality took a dip, but then how everything has panned out took a little bit of a dip, but we still got great stuff.
Well,
Soul
we
is
got to go
great.
back
Turning
before though.
Red.
I think we have to look at like the first problems that Pixar really had were, you know, Brave and The Good
Brave and Good
Dinosaur, when
Dinosaur,
you were
yeah.
hearing that, you know, they were restructuring and rewriting and re-editing and changing things and hiring new voice actors to replace ones that were in the previous cast. And that's when you realized that things were changing. And then also, you know, when John Lasseter left, you had Pete Docter come in, and you know that those things change as well. And so I think like it's in its own weird sort of puberty in itself. I think Pixar's in puberty where it's
Brought
growing
it
and
back full
changing.
circle, baby.
I well, it's true, and I think it's trying to find its next stage and figure out what it is and who it is and
Totally.
what it represents. So, you know, you got to let it have its growing pains.
Agreed. All right. A 3 out of 5 from me, a 2.5 out of 5 from Eric. Let us know what you guys think of Inside Out 2. I think from early things I've seen, Eric and I are kind of in the minority. Which hey, happens. It's always funny because I don't let any of that stuff influence what we think. But it is always interesting because I'll talk to you after a movie and I'm like, okay, we are on the same page, and not all the time we are, but a lot of the times we are. And a lot of that time it can lump into the general consensus or whatever when it comes to critics. And then
You
I
get a
saw the
Dune
reactions come out and I'm like, yeah, you get a Dune, or in this, I
or
think we're
Halloween
still,
Ends.
yeah, where we love Halloween Ends, but and I just think I'm still, I gave it a mild, positive review, but I saw some people calling it one of Pixar's best, and I can't wait to hear other people's opinions or read them. I haven't yet because I'm I'm just curious. I always like that sometimes too. Like, I know people get upset when people don't agree with them sometimes, and like that's happened to us many, many times.
Well, especially with these movies, right? Because
Yeah.
they're unanimously praised a lot of the time. And there's,
Yeah.
like Star Wars, like Marvel, I think there is a certain touchiness when it comes to how you review or critique these things. I'm leaning more into the negative side of things, but I still am able to find, moments that I enjoyed. But I think if you really love these films, people can not take
Take it
offense to it,
personal.
but yeah, there's a personal nature, because it feels like, oh, you're attacking my childhood, or you're attacking something that is, pure and innocent. And sometimes you get that with, like, one of the few responses I got for Inside Out 2 with my quick little write-up was, oh, was no, you're wrong. And I don't usually respond to these people, but I did, and I just said, have you seen the film yet? And the person responded back and said, no, but I'm sure it's not that bad. And I said, well, I don't think it's that bad. I just think it doesn't work in the way that the first movie does. And so, like, I think when you go into one of these films, like, that's what we were talking about before, where Pixar had such a strong, batting average that it's almost like, okay, you're just going into this thing accepting that it's going to be great.
Yeah.
Or at the least very
that
good.
can affect your opinion another way too, right? Like,
Exactly.
sometimes I go and revisit, look at Dune 1, right? I went back and enjoyed the hell out of Dune 1. So like sometimes expectations and, critics are no different. Like, yes, you want to go in and give an objective view of something, but sometimes, subconsciously some things can affect you, marketing, expectations, and that could be a whole movie in itself in the Inside Out universe in a film critic's mind. No one wants to watch that. All right, thank you everyone for listening. We really do appreciate it. We'll be back on, you'll see our beautiful faces eventually, but for maybe we'll just retire our faces in general. But we're going to be doing just audio only for the foreseeable future. So if you're listening to this on YouTube, please go subscribe on podcast services, because then you can take this with you on the go or anywhere you want. Just listen to us on podcast services. I know if you have YouTube Premium and stuff like that, you can listen to it without the screen being on and stuff like that. But we'll be doing that until probably after TIFF, if I'm being honest. Like, just because there's so much going on, this just makes it a lot easier if we only do audio only. So we'll be doing that. I'll still throw everything up on YouTube for the people who like listening or watching on there, but just letting you guys all know that. And during TIFF, it's so hard for us to record video anyway, because we're on the go. Eric, that's going to be here before we know it. So
oh, we have to submit accreditation soon. So
if we'll get in, we'll see. But thank you everyone. Please go check out our letterbox, which is Untitled_movies. All of our reviews and interviews are up over there, as well as our ratings and lists. Maybe I'll post Eric and I's Pixar ranking again up on there. And you can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Eric Marchand. You can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on all the social medias at EM6211, also a Rotten Tomatoes account. And if you have the time and you've listened to this whole episode, please rate and review us on your listening account of choice, whether it be iTunes, Spotify, whatever you listen to this show on.
5-star review really helps. So
yeah,
because those 1-star reviews that some people, when they don't agree with your opinion, I don't love that, but it's okay.
But again, it's also, are you agreeing with, are you disagreeing with the quality of the review, or the not agreeing with the film perspective?
Much like when you put art out for everyone to watch, it's subject to other people's opinion. Much like when you put your opinion out there, it is subject to other people's opinions. So
everyone's a critic.
Until next time.
This one's for you, Pouchy.